She had one rule she had kept through everything, through the collapse of her engagement, through the 14 months of rebuilding in silence, through every night she walked into a building full of powerful men and made herself invisible enough to survive it.
It's okay.
The rule was not complicated.
You're safe now.
It was 3
What
words.
happened? Who are you?
Never show pain. She broke it on a Thursday night at 2:51 in the morning, on the 32nd floor of the most powerful building in Chicago. In a corridor so polished, the city lights reflected up from the marble floor like a second sky beneath her feet. Her body had been running on 4 hours of sleep and black coffee and sheer refusal for 11 consecutive days, and somewhere between the East Corridor and the partner's lounge, it simply stopped. She felt the floor come up to meet her. She did not feel herself hit it. The first thing she was aware of was a voice, low and quiet in the way that certain voices were quiet. Not from softness, but from the complete absence of any need to be loud. And the voice said, very calmly, "Don't you dare die in my building." He did not call for help. He did not step back. He picked her up off the floor of his 32nd floor corridor like she weighed nothing. Like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, like the most dangerous man in Chicago had been waiting to do exactly this for a very long time. She did not know yet who he was. She would. Stay with me. This is not the story of a woman who was saved. This is the story of a woman who saved herself, and the man who was watching when she did it. 48 hours earlier. Chicago in February. The specific kind of cold that makes you feel like the city is punishing you personally for being outside. Nadia Cole was on the 447 bus, sitting in the second seat from the back because the heating vent was directly beneath it, and her coat had a tear along the left inner seam she had not gotten around to fixing. She had $4 and some change in her wallet. She had a bruise on her right wrist covered with a wide elastic band she told herself was for carpal tunnel, which was a lie she had been telling herself for 3 weeks. She had a paperback book pressed between her knee and the window. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, 3rd edition. The spine held together with electrical tape because the back cover had come entirely off sometime in the last year. And she had not replaced it because she could not afford to replace it. And also because a book held together with electrical tape felt, in some private way, she did not examine closely, like a description of herself. She was 28 years old. She had a paralegal certification she was not using, because the licensing board complaint Derek had filed against her 14 months ago had stripped her of the position she'd been 6 weeks from starting. She had a night shift cleaning contract with a company that serviced 4 downtown high-rises, including the Voss Tower on Michigan Avenue. She worked 6 nights a week. She slept 4 to 5 hours during the day in an apartment with thin walls and an upstairs neighbor who argued with his television at unpredictable intervals. She ate whatever was cheapest at the grocery 2 blocks over, the one with the flickering produce light that had been broken for 5 months. The cashier's name was Doris. Doris always asked how she was doing. Nadia always said fine. Doris always said, "Good, hun." This was, in its small way, one of the best relationships in Nadia's current life. And she was aware of what that said about the current state of her life. The plan, and there was always a plan, because a woman in Nadia's position either had a plan or she had nothing, was this: save $1,100 by April. Renew the paralegal certification, apply for the open position at Hartwell and Associates, which had posted twice now, which she was, and she knew this without arrogance, more than qualified for. Get out of the cleaning contract. Get out of the thin-walled apartment. Get out of the part of her life that still felt like surviving. and into the part that felt like actually living. $730. She was already most of the way there. It was possible. It was almost possible. And then her supervisor handed her the reassignment slip before the Tuesday's shift, and the slip said, Voss Tower, 32nd floor, restricted access, start Thursday. And Nadia Cole pocketed the slip, caught her bus, and told herself that it was just another building. She was very wrong. The Voss Tower was different from every building Nadia had worked in, and she knew it the moment she stepped off the service elevator. It was not quiet the way most high-rises were quiet at night. It was awake. The lights on the 32nd floor were fully on. Not the motion-triggered safety lighting, but the actual overhead fixtures. The kind that said someone intended to use this space and did not particularly care what time it was. There were voices somewhere at the far end of the corridor. Not loud. In fact, they were precise and low in a way that meant they were not meant to carry. And Nadia had learned enough about powerful people in the last year to recognize the difference between a conversation meant for the room and a conversation meant only for the people in it. She kept to the right side of the hall. She started with the windows, the way she always did. Glass first, surfaces, floors. She had perfected a way of working a room that made her as peripheral as smoke. Present enough to do the job, invisible enough that no one looked directly at her. She was good at peripheral. She had become good at it out of necessity. She was midway through the east corridor when she heard something through a door that had not quite latched. Two voices, male, speaking at the careful register of men discussing something they had discussed before and expected to discuss again. She caught 4 words before the draft moved the door half an inch further closed. The accounts don't match. She kept moving. She filed it. She kept her hands steady and her head down and her pace even because she had learned that the way you survived environments like this one was to never let anyone see you processing what you just heard. She turned the corner into the service junction. And she stopped. Not because she was startled. She had trained the startle response almost entirely out of herself because visible reactions in dangerous situations told the dangerous situation exactly where you were. She stopped because standing at the far end of the junction corridor, leaning against the wall with his jacket folded over his arm and his phone in his hand and the particular air of a man who had arranged to be exactly where he was Derek Ashton, her ex-fiancé. He looked at her, and his expression did not arrange itself into surprise. It arranged itself into something Nadia recognized the way you recognized a smell that made your body cold before your brain caught up. The expression was recognition, and beneath recognition, it was calculation. And beneath calculation, it was the specific satisfaction of a man who had found something exactly where he had arranged for it to be found. Her stomach dropped. Her hands kept moving. She adjusted her grip on the cleaning cart and put it between them because she knew from experience that small distances mattered, and the cart was the only barrier available. "Nadia," he said. Easy. Pleasant. The voice he used when there were optics to maintain. There were no optics here. He used it anyway, which was, she had learned, the most frightening thing about him. The way he performed reasonableness, even when there was no audience for it. Derek. Flat. Empty. Her heart was doing something irregular, and she refused to let it show in her face, because her face was the only thing she had full control over right now. He stepped forward. She did not step back. She let the cart absorb the closing distance, kept her eyes on his hands, because that was what you watched, not the face, the hands. "I need something from this floor," he said, still pleasant, still easy. The voice of a man presenting you with a straightforward request that you had not yet understood was not a request at all. "The 32nd floor admin server. There are financial records in it I need copied. You have access now. The key card you were given on Tuesday. I know about it." He paused. He let her understand the dimensions of what he was describing. That he had known she would be here. That someone had told him she would be here. That this encounter was not an accident. "No," she said. He smiled. The smile was the thing she was most afraid of in the world, because it meant he was not surprised, and had calculated past her answer already. He reached out and took her arm, not hard enough to leave a mark, never hard enough to leave a mark. That was one of his specific disciplines. But firm enough that moving would look like a scene, and scenes in buildings like this one were exactly what she could not afford. "You said no last time," he said, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same one, always the same one, the one that now registered in her nervous system as threat before it registered as anything else. Remember what happened last time? She remembered. She would always remember. The licensing board complaint, the 4 months of appearances, the paralegal position gone, the 1.5 years she had spent with the specific knowledge that a man who hurt you could keep hurting you from a distance using legal architecture. And there was almost nothing you could do about it except survive it and keep building. Her mouth was dry. Her hands were ice. She made herself look at him directly because that was the other thing she had learned. You looked at the thing that frightened you. You did not look away from it, because looking away told it where the weakness was. "You have 48 hours, he said. "Think carefully." He released her arm, adjusted his jacket, resumed the easy posture of a man concluding a civilized conversation. "Good seeing you, Nadia." He walked toward the elevator. She stood in the corridor and did not move until she heard the elevator doors close. Then she looked up. At the far end of the hallway, mounted high on the wall near the emergency exit sign, a security camera blinked once. The indicator light small and red and steady in the dark. Someone had watched everything. She did not know who. She gathered her cart and kept working. Her hands shook for approximately 4 minutes. Then they stopped, because she had trained them to stop, because the shaking was a luxury she had not been able to afford for a very long time. She saw Roman Voss for the first time on Friday night, and she understood immediately that whatever she had expected power to look like, it had not looked like this. She had expected volume. Presence announced. The specific theatrical quality of men who had earned authority and needed everyone in the room to know it. Roman Voss came out of the North Conference Room at 11:15, and the hallway reorganized itself around him with no drama at all. The 3 men at the far end of the corridor stopped what they were doing and oriented toward him the way compass needles oriented to north, not because they were required to or afraid to fail, but because that was simply what happened when he walked in. He was tall, dark coat over a gray shirt, no tie. His hair had gray at the temples that looked like something earned, rather than something happening to him passively. He moved at a pace that said he had never once in his life been required to hurry, and had therefore forgotten hurrying was an option. He spoke to 2 men near the corridor junction. Brief sentences. Both men left within 60 seconds. He turned and walked toward the east corridor, where Nadia was working the baseboards near the window, with her head down and her cloth moving and her body positioned to occupy as little of his attention as possible. She tracked his footsteps without looking up. Leather soles on polished marble. Unhurried. Even. She felt him pass the cart. She felt him slow. She felt him stop. The stillness of a man who has registered something and decided in the same instant to address it. She did not look up. She kept her cloth moving. His voice came from above and slightly to her right, and it was entirely without performance. Not a man speaking to be heard, a man speaking because there was a fact that needed acknowledging. "The bruise on your right wrist," he said. 3 days old. 4, possibly. Periorbital bruising moves to that color at 72 to 96 hours post-impact. A pause that was not uncomfortable. "You should ice it. Keep it elevated for 20 minutes before you sleep. The joint will stiffen otherwise." He walked past her. He kept going. That was all. She did not look up until his footsteps had rounded the north corner, and the corridor was entirely quiet again. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at her wrist, at the elastic band, at the shape of what was beneath it, at the bruise she had been hiding with careful sleeve management for 4 days. And she thought about a man who had looked at her for 15 seconds and seen something she had been hiding from everyone, and mentioned it the way you mentioned a fact that needed acknowledgement. No weight in it. No agenda. No performance of noticing. Just, "I see this. Here's what you should do about it." She went back to work. She was almost to the service elevator when Marco appeared. Compact, watchful, the specific kind of man whose entire professional function was to see things before they became problems. He stopped beside the cart. "Your assignment on this floor has been extended," he said without preamble. "Every night this week, you'll receive a second key card. North elevator only, floor 32. In by 10:30, out by 11:45. He handed her the card. "Any questions?" She looked at the card. She looked at him. She said, "The man in the corridor last night, the one who approached me near the service junction, does his presence in this building have anything to do with why my assignment was changed?" Marco went still in the specific way of a man who has just received information he was already collecting. "Tell me about the approach," he said. She told him. Not all of it. Enough. When she finished, Marco said, "What you told me, was the interaction voluntary?" She looked at him directly. "No," she said. Marco nodded once, with the economy of a man who uses gestures instead of words when words are unnecessary. "Thank you, Ms. Cole. North elevator, 10:30. He walked away. She went up to the 32nd floor, and she worked the east corridor and the surfaces and the floors, and she was done at 11:41. On the way to the service elevator, she passed the window at the end of the north hallway. Through it, at an angle, she could see into the conference room. Low lights, long dark table, one person sitting alone at the far end. Not working, sitting, reading. And she could see from this distance, through the glass, the specific shape of the book in his hands. A worn paperback, the back cover reattached with what looked, even from here, like electrical tape. She stood at the window for exactly 3 seconds. Then she got in the elevator and went down. She thought about it for the entire ride home. 2 people in the same building, same hours, same book, same broken spine, same tape. She didn't know what it meant. She knew it meant something. Derek came back on Saturday. Not to the building. He was methodical about his distances and what he put on record. But to the parking structure 4 blocks north, where Nadia transferred between the 9 bus and the 14 at 11:15 on nights she worked the Voss Tower. He had known this route for the same reason he had known about the key card and the assignment change. Someone had told him. She would not learn who until much later. He was leaning against the concrete pillar at the transfer point when she came down the ramp. And the moment she saw him, her body performed the inventory it always performed. Exits, distances, cameras, time. While her face performed nothing. Because her face was the one thing she had learned to make completely still. "You didn't answer," he said. "The 48 hours are up." "I know." "Then you've made a decision." "I have." She kept walking. He stepped in front of her. Not touching, not yet. He knew exactly how close to come before contact was technically required. That was one of his precise, calculated disciplines. But close enough that walking past him would require either a physical confrontation or making herself smaller. And she was done making herself smaller. "You understand what I'm describing," he said. And the pleasant voice was thinner now, worn at the edges, the way it got when he was running out of patience for a performance no one was applauding. "It's a simple transfer of files. One night, I walk away. You never hear from me again. Derek. I have the documentation, all of it. The licensing board evidence, the fabricated complaint, cross-referenced and ready. I've done this before, and I will do it again, and this time I will make it permanent." He stopped, because the headlights came around the corner of the structure at the end of that sentence. One car, moving at a pace that was not the pace of a car looking for a parking spot. It moved at the pace of a car that had already found what it was looking for and was taking its time about the arrival. It stopped 20 feet away. Dark gray, tinted windows, engine running. The quality of the stillness inside the car was the kind of stillness that had mass. Derek looked at it. She watched his calculation. She could see it happening, the reweighing of the variables, the identification of an element he had not accounted for. And she watched the pleasant voice thin further and go brittle at the edges. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Derek straightened. He adjusted his jacket with the specific care of a man, reassembling his composure. "We'll finish this conversation another time," he said. He walked to the elevator without looking back. The doors closed behind him. Nadia stood in the parking structure with her bag on her shoulder and waited. The car did not move for 30 seconds. Then the driver's door opened. Roman Voss stepped out, and the specific quality of the air in the structure changed. Not dramatically, not in any way she could point to exactly. It simply changed. The way the air in a room changed when someone walked into it who was used to being the most consequential person in any space they occupied. He did not look at where Derek had gone. He looked at her. He said, "Get in the car." Not a threat. An instruction. The tone of a man who had decided on a course of action and was implementing it with the same directness he brought to everything else. "I don't know you," she said. "You don't." He did not argue with this. He held the car door open. He did not move. "You can say no. I'll drive." A pause. "Your choice." She stood in the structure and she thought about the route Derek knew, the buses he had memorized, the way he had arranged this encounter as casually as arranging a meeting. She thought about 11:15 on Saturday and on Sunday and on every night after that, alone at this transfer point, and what it would look like. Then she got in the car. Roman closed the door and walked around without the small gestures of a man who had won something. He drove without the radio. Chicago moved past the windows. She tracked the route out of habit, Michigan to Lake Shore, north, and tried to find something to say that was not either too much or too little, and failed, and sat with the failing in silence. After a while, he said without looking at her, "How long?" It was not a question. "He's been calling for 3 weeks," she said. The history is 14 months. Longer if you count when we were together. He hurt you. Not a question. Yes, she said. A pause, the particular pause of a man running through something. He threatened you with fabricated documentation on this floor. He's done it before. Yes, he filed a licensing board complaint 14 months ago. It was false. It took 4 months and most of my savings to prove it was false. By the time it was dismissed, the paralegal position I'd been offered was gone. She said it without weight because she had learned to say things without weight. He knows I can't afford to go through that again. He won't be filing anything, Roman said. Flat. The specific flatness of something that has been decided rather than assessed. His accounts, the ones he's been using to build financial leverage, are adjacent to my operations. He's been using proximity to my business to manufacture credibility he doesn't have. I became aware of this 4 days ago. His access to those accounts ends tomorrow morning. She looked at him then, directly, because that was how she looked at things she needed to understand. Why are you telling me that? He did not answer right away. He drove for another block. Then he said, because you looked at me. She waited. Most people in my building don't look at me directly, he said. They look at the floor or at a point past my shoulder. It's a learned gesture. They're performing a kind of invisibility to protect themselves. Another pause. You looked at me. Thursday night. When I passed your cart. Not out of defiance, not out of performance. You looked at me the way someone looked at a thing they needed to assess accurately. I was counting the exits, she said. Something in his face shifted. Almost a smile. Not quite. I know, he said. That's why I'm telling you. The car stopped outside a building she didn't recognize. Quiet, residential. The kind of address that expensive cities kept tucked into unremarkable blocks as if the concealment were itself a luxury. There is an apartment on the 7th floor, Roman said. He handed her a key card. It is clean. It is safe. It will not be connected to anything that interests Derek Ashton. He looked forward through the windshield. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to sleep tonight without checking the door. She held the key card with both hands. She was so tired. The kind of tired that lived in the bones and the marrow, and the specific part of a person that had been braced for impact for so long, it had started to believe the brace was its natural shape. She said, I have a shift tomorrow night. I know. She got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building. She did not look back at the car. She went inside. She stayed. Not easily. She was not by any measure a woman who found it easy to exist in situations she had not chosen and could not fully calculate. But she stayed because she was tired in a way that went past pride, and because, for the first time in 11 months, she had slept through the night without waking at 2 and 3 and 4 and checking the door. So she stayed. A week passed, and then another. The Voss Tower in late February. The same 32nd floor every night. The same north elevator. The same sequence. Glass, surfaces, floors. The same break in the staff kitchen at 11:15 with the coffee machine that cost more than her rent and produced coffee that was, by any objective standard, the best thing she had encountered in the last year. She looked forward to the break in a way she had not looked forward to anything for a long time. Roman kept the same hours. She started to see him the way you saw someone who occupied the same rhythm in the same space, not by arrangement, not because either of them was seeking it, but because 11:30 in a building like Voss Tower meant certain patterns intersected, and their patterns intersected in the kitchen. The first night they were both there, neither of them spoke. She made coffee. He read. She sat at the far end of the counter with her Aurelius and read 4 pages. And then he said, without looking up, "There is a passage in Book 6 that you are probably going to disagree with." She looked up. "Which one?" He cited it. She did disagree with it. She told him why. He did not give her the reflexive agreement of a man performing openness, and he did not dismiss her the way men dismissed opinions they did not expect to encounter from women in cleaning uniforms. He thought about it. She counted the seconds. It was 38. And then he said, "That is a reasonable interpretation. I don't think it is what he meant, but I can see the argument." And went back to reading. She went back to reading. She thought about this exchange on the bus home, and then thought about thinking about it, which was its own kind of information. Over the next 2 weeks, they built, without naming it, a rhythm. Not every night, not by appointment, but often enough that she began to understand what she was learning about him, which was this. Roman Voss was a man who thought in complete sentences. He did not perform intelligence, and he did not perform power, and he did not perform openness. He simply was all 3 things, and he moved through conversations the way he moved through rooms, directly, without excess, with the specific efficiency of a person who had decided long ago that anything less than honest engagement was a waste of the time they had left. He laughed once. She made an observation. Dry, she admitted later, possibly too dry, about the evident preference of Stoic emperors for writing extensively about enduring hardship while simultaneously running an empire that depended on other people doing the actual enduring. He laughed, briefly, quietly, real, and it changed his face entirely, loosened something in it that was usually fastened tight. And she felt something in her chest that she identified immediately as dangerous and chose not to examine. Marco noticed from the doorway. He said nothing. He kept walking. On a Wednesday, 10 days into the rhythm, she came back from break and passed the North Conference Room, and the door was open and the lights were low, and he was not at the table. He was at the window, standing with his back partially to the room, one hand flat against the glass, looking at the city below with the posture of a man who had lowered all of the architecture he usually kept raised. In his other hand, he held a photograph. Small. She should have kept walking. She had a deep and practiced instinct for the boundary between other people's private moments and her own presence. An instinct built from years of making herself peripheral in spaces that were not designed with her in mind. She should have kept walking. She knocked on the door frame instead, not loudly, just enough. He turned. He looked at her without recalibrating. The photograph stayed in his hand. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the corridor the first night, directly, without performance. And he waited. She walked into the room. She sat at the conference table, not too close, not performatively far. She did not ask about the photograph. She did not fill the silence. She just sat in it, the way she had learned to sit in silence without needing to fix it, which was one of the things she had learned in the last 3 years that she had not expected to learn. After a while, he said, her name was Elena. She was 22. He looked at the photograph. She trusted someone who was supposed to protect her. He did not. A pause that had weight in it. She is why I do what I do. She is why I have the code I have. Nadia thought about the parking structure. The car door held open, the instruction given without threat. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to sleep without checking the door. She understood now exactly where that came from. I am sorry, she said. The real kind, not the reflexive kind. She would have argued with you about Aurelius, he said. She thought he was too comfortable to be a real stoic. A beat. She was right. He looked at her. She was right, Nadia agreed. And something in the room settled around that agreement like a thing finding its weight. She stayed until the silence felt like enough. Then she stood and said good night and walked to the elevator and stood in the corridor and waited, and her phone buzzed with a message from her sister Claire that said, I need to tell you something. Can we meet tomorrow? It's about Derek. She looked at the message for a long moment. She thought about the word proheresis, which she had read about in her Aurelius. The Stoic concept of the choosing self, the faculty inside a person that cannot be touched by external circumstance, that remains entirely one's own, even when everything else is taken. She thought about choosing carefully. She replied, yes. She would think about that choice for a long time afterward. She would think about what careful looked like from the outside and what it looked like from the inside, and how those two things were not always the same. Claire chose a bakery on the north side for the meeting. Warm lighting, mismatched chairs, the particular atmosphere of a place designed to feel safe. Nadia arrived first. She always arrived first. She sat facing the door. She always faced the door. Claire arrived 9 minutes late with an apology and a hug that lasted a beat too long. Nadia registered the beat, filed it, moved past it, because she had learned that the way you survived a world in which the people you trusted sometimes turned was not by suspecting everyone forever, but by noticing and still choosing. You look better, Claire said, pulling back, examining her the way older sisters examine things, with the specific authority of someone who had been present at the beginning and felt entitled to assess the distance traveled since. You have color. I'm sleeping, Nadia said. Good. Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee. The gesture Nadia had been watching her make their entire lives. When she was composing, when she was organizing an approach to something she'd already decided on. I need to tell you about Derek. All right. He's been watching you, Nadia. Not just calling, watching. He knows about the building. He knows about the assignment change. He's been asking about Roman Voss. She looked at the table. Then up. Her eyes were serious, with the specific seriousness of someone performing an emotion they had rehearsed. Nadia noticed this the way she noticed the hug. Filed it. Did not examine it yet. Why are you telling me this? Because you're my sister. Because I'm afraid for you. Claire reached into her bag. She put a phone on the table between them, small, prepaid, the kind bought at the back of drugstores. Keep this. If things get dangerous, if you need to get out quickly, call me. Day or night, I will come. Nadia looked at the phone. Her memory was precise, and she could not turn it off. It filed the angle at which the phone was placed on the table, the deliberateness of the gesture, the specific quality of her sister's pause before releasing it, the way Claire's eyes moved from the phone to Nadia's face a half-second too quickly, as if checking whether something had landed. A note that was off. Slightly. The way a note in a familiar piece of music was off, when one instrument was playing something slightly different from what it should have been playing. She picked up the phone. Thank you, she said. She meant it the way you mean things when you have decided that choosing hope is worth the risk. Because the alternative, suspecting your sister across a bakery table over coffee, was a kind of exhaustion she was not ready for. They talked about their mother in Portland, about a movie Claire had seen. They hugged at the corner and went their separate ways, and Nadia tucked the burner phone into her coat pocket and got on the bus and thought about nothing in particular on the ride back. She did not know that Marco had been watching the meeting from across the street. She did not know that Marco had flagged Claire 3 days earlier when a routine surveillance check caught her in contact with Derek Ashton's legal team. She did not know that Marco had watched Claire put the phone on the table, with an expression that any trained professional would have recognized as the expression of someone completing a task rather than offering a gift. She did not know any of this until 4 in the morning when the knock came. 3 sharp, specific knocks on the emergency stairwell door at the end of the 7th floor corridor. The knock of a man delivering information that could not wait for the elevator. She opened it. Marco was in the stairwell with his coat still on, and his expression doing the thing she had come to understand as controlled urgency. The gear shift of a man who managed emergencies professionally and was currently managing one. "We need to move," he said. "Now. Take what you cannot leave behind." She took her coat. She took the documentation folder she kept in the inner lining at all times, out of a habit she had developed after the licensing board incident and had never been able to break. She took her Aurelius. They moved her in 4 minutes. She was in a different location before she had fully processed that the first location had been compromised. Roman was there when she arrived. He was standing near the window with his coat still on, and his posture doing the thing it almost never did. Holding more than it was designed to hold, just barely. He turned when she came in. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had just learned something that required him to perform a significant amount of internal work before he could speak. And he was in the middle of performing that work, and he was not going to let her see most of it. But she saw enough. He told her directly. No architecture around it, no staging for easier reception. The way he told her everything, in the actual shape of the thing. Her sister had been in contact with Derek Ashton for 6 weeks. The burner phone was a tracking device. Claire had been reporting Nadia's location since the night of the bakery meeting, her movements, her schedule, the 7th floor apartment address, which she had obtained from a text Nadia had sent the day she moved in. The text had said, "I'm safe. I found a good place." That was all Claire had needed. Nadia sat down. She sat down not as a choice, but as a consequence. The way people sat when their body concluded independently that standing was no longer possible. She looked at her hands. She thought about the hug that lasted a beat too long. She thought about the phone placed on the table with the deliberateness of a task being completed. She thought about 100 small things she had noticed and chosen not to examine, because examining them would have meant acknowledging what they meant. And acknowledging what they meant would have required her to do something about it. And she had not been ready to do something about it yet. She had been ready to choose hope instead. She understood now what that had cost. She did not cry. She would cry eventually. Somewhere private later, in a room with the door closed and the light off. But not here, not now. Not in front of Roman Voss, who was standing across the room watching her absorb something terrible, with a stillness that told her he was absorbing it too. On her behalf, in whatever way he was capable of absorbing things on behalf of someone else. "Derek's plan," Roman said after a while. "He intends to present fabricated financial evidence at a public event next week. A gala, the Drake Hotel. He has a federal contact he's been cultivating for 8 months. He will arrive with documentation that puts my operations in legal jeopardy in a public space where a quiet resolution is impossible. He has been building this case for 2 months. He paused. My legal team has a counterposition. It requires time. How much time? More than we have. Nadia looked up. She thought about the 14 months after the licensing board complaint. She thought about what she had learned during those 14 months. Not just about Derek's methods, but about the specific structure of fabricated financial documents, the patterns that distinguish them from legitimate records, the way counter-documentation worked when it was built by someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. I need to see the fabricated file, she said. Roman looked at her. And your real financial records? Complete access. She held his eyes. I spent 14 months as a paralegal in financial litigation. I know exactly how a file like this is built and exactly what it looks like against real records. If you give me 48 hours and full access, I will build you a counterfile that will hold up against anything he presents. He was quiet for a long time, not hesitating, calculating. She could feel the calculation the way you felt the specific quality of a room when someone in it was doing the precise, consequential kind of thinking that decided things. He said, Marco. Marco appeared in the doorway. Give her everything she asks for. Nadia nodded. She thought about Elena and about a code built out of grief. She thought about what Roman Voss had built with his loss and what she intended to build with hers. She opened the documentation folder she had carried out of the 7th floor apartment in the lining of her coat, and she took out her certification card and she set it on the table and she got to work. She worked for 41 hours. Marco set her up in a secure room with 2 laptops and full database access and the actual financial records of the Voss operations, which Roman had handed her in a sealed folder without ceremony and without conditions, which was the most significant act of trust she had been offered in several years, and which she did not examine for its emotional weight because she did not have time for emotional weight right now. She had 48 hours and a counterfile to build. She worked with the focused, channeled intensity of a woman who has been carrying the weight of someone else's cruelty for 14 months and has just been handed the precise tool to put it down. She cross-referenced the fabricated records against the real ones with the technical fluency of someone who had done this kind of analysis in litigation contexts and knew exactly what she was looking for. She found 14 specific instances of document manipulation. She found 2 that crossed the line from civil fraud into federal criminal territory. She built a 42-page annotated summary in language precise enough that any prosecutor or financial journalist could follow it without context. She made 5 copies. She placed the first in a sealed envelope addressed by name to a journalist at the Chicago Tribune who covered financial crime. The second went to a federal prosecutor in the Financial Crimes Division, whose public case history she had been tracking for 2 years. The third went to a freelance journalist with an audience in the hundreds of thousands who had broken 3 major financial fraud stories in the last 18 months. The fourth she gave to Marco, who had contacts she did not ask about, which was the correct decision. The 5th she kept. She slept for 4 hours. She showered. She put on the black dress she had owned for 4 years, the one she had altered at the seams, the one with the invisible repair along the left shoulder she had sewn herself at 1 a.m. in the thin-walled apartment. She did not buy anything new. She had thought about buying something new and decided against it because she was going to walk into that room as exactly who she was, and who she was did not need a new dress to be enough. The Drake Hotel on a Thursday evening. Grand ballroom, chandeliers. The specific orchestrated warmth of a room designed to make people with power feel at home and everyone else feel slightly insufficient. Nadia walked through the entrance at 9:20 and did not feel insufficient. She felt the thing she had been building toward for 14 months, which did not have a simple name, but which was closest to the word prohairesis, the choosing self, the faculty that remained entirely her own, regardless of what was taken from her, the thing that could not be diminished from the outside. Roman was already in the room. She felt him the way she had learned to feel his presence, not visually, as a change in the air, the specific quality of a space when the most consequential person in it was paying attention. She did not look for him. She crossed the room toward the bar. Derek was there. Of course he was there. Near the bar, holding a scotch, flanked by two men in gray suits, wearing the pleasant expression of a man who had cultivated the specific social architecture of a public event to execute a private plan. He saw her coming and did something interesting with his face. The several rapid expressions of surprise, calculation, and then the rearrangement of both into pleasantness. And she watched all of it with the cold, precise attention she had developed over 2 years of learning to read exactly what his face was covering. "Nadia," he said, "you're bold coming here." She held out the envelope. He looked at it. "What is this?" "A copy," she said. She kept her voice even and clear, the way you kept your voice when you had rehearsed something important enough times that the rehearsal had become certainty. "Of the complete financial record you fabricated, cross-referenced against the real documentation, annotated with 14 specific instances of document manipulation, flagged for 2 violations that fall under federal criminal statute." She held his eyes. "The original is with a Tribune financial journalist. A second is with a federal prosecutor in the Financial Crimes Division. She has been building a file on accounts adjacent to yours for approximately 22 months. You just completed it for her." Derek's expression went through its sequence, pleasant to careful to still. He opened the envelope. He read for 23 seconds. The color left his face with a specific quality of color, leaving the face of a man who has just discovered that the architecture he built his plan on has been replaced, quietly, while he was planning, with something that will not hold his weight. He laughed. The laugh came out shaking, and he knew it, and she watched him know it. "You have 48 hours, she said, to withdraw the complaint you filed and to deliver to Claire Cole written documentation releasing her from the financial obligation you have been using to control her for 6 years. After 48 hours, I stop being the person you're negotiating with." She picked up her clutch. She turned and walked away from him. She did not look back. This was deliberate. You did not look back at the thing you had finished with. 20 feet across the room, she felt him, Roman, before she found him visually. She looked up and he was at the far windows, dark coat. Still, he had watched everything. He walked toward her, not hurried, not performing, just moving, directly and without excess, toward her, the way he moved through everything. He stopped beside her. "You went in alone," he said. "Yes." "You built the file in 41 hours. "Yes." "And then you walked in here and handed it to him yourself." "Yes." A pause that had a different quality than any of their pauses before, fuller, with more weight to it, the weight of something that had been accumulating and had now arrived at the surface. "I told you I would be in the room," he said. "You were in the room," she said. He looked at her. She looked back, and across the room, at the bar, Derek Ashton stood with an open envelope and a face the color of old marble. And the 2 gray-suited men had already moved several feet away from him. Which was what happened when the architecture fell. which was what always happened when the architecture fell, which was what Nadia had known would happen when she put the envelope in his hands. Because she had built the file herself, and she knew exactly what was in it, and she knew exactly what it would do. Derek Ashton withdrew the complaint within 36 hours. He delivered the documentation, releasing Claire before the 48-hour mark. This was not mercy. It was the calculation of a man who recognized that every hour past the deadline made his position worse, and who was, above everything else, a man who calculated. The journalists ran the story regardless, because Nadia had made sure the story was not contingent on Derek's cooperation. The Tribune piece ran first on a Friday morning, and by noon it had been shared widely enough that his financial contacts began the specific, careful process of increasing their distance from him. The federal prosecutor, whose case Nadia had effectively completed, moved within the week. The licensing review extended into a formal investigation. By April, the accounts were frozen. By June, he was in a proceeding that he had constructed the conditions for himself, over years, one deliberate act at a time, using other people's silence and other people's fear as the load-bearing material. The material had run out. He had run out of people willing to be silent and afraid. Claire called on a Sunday afternoon. The call lasted 47 minutes. It was not easy, and it was not a resolution. Some things did not resolve in a single conversation. Some damage required a longer accounting than one phone call could hold. But it was honest, which was the beginning of something that might eventually be real. They talked again the following Sunday, and the one after that. It was going to take time. Nadia had decided she was willing to give it time. Nadia started at Hartwell & Associates on the first Monday of April. Her supervisor told her in the second week that she was the most prepared junior paralegal they had hired in 5 years. Her supervisor told her in the fourth week that she was also the one most likely to argue a senior attorney into a better position. She took the second observation as the more significant compliment. She read her Aurelius on the bus on the way in every morning. She had a new copy. Roman had given it to her, the specific annotated edition she had been meaning to find for 2 years. She had left her old copy on the nightstand in the 7th-floor apartment. She had done this deliberately, thinking that whoever came after her might need it. Roman Voss was... She did not have a word yet that covered all of it. He was a man with a complicated life, and a code built out of grief and a laugh she had heard exactly 6 times now, and which she was keeping count of the way she kept count of things she did not want to lose track of. He called on Tuesdays. Sometimes they argued about Aurelius. Once he drove her to the lake at night, and they sat in the car, and she told him about her father, who had left when she was 8. And he sat with that the way she had learned to sit with things, without trying to fix it, just acknowledging the weight. He told her about Elena, more than he had told her in the conference room. She listened. They watched the water for a while, and then drove back through the city without the radio. She did not feel like she was surviving anymore. She noticed the difference the way you noticed a change in weather, not all at once, but gradually, and then suddenly, and then, as if it had always been this way. On the last morning of March, before the Hartwell position started, she stood in the 7th-floor apartment and looked at her right wrist. The elastic band was gone. The bruise had been gone for 8 weeks. The joint was not stiff. She stood in the morning light and looked at her wrist, at the unobstructed shape of it, and felt the specific weight of everything that had been there and was no longer there, and decided that the weight she felt now was not absence, but the space left by something that had been put down. She got dressed. She got on the bus. She had places to be. And here's what I want you to carry with you from this story. The Stoics had a concept: prohairesis, the choosing self, the faculty inside a person that cannot be taken, cannot be broken, cannot be diminished by external circumstance. It can be surrendered. That is the one thing that can happen to it. But it cannot be taken, only surrendered. Nadia Cole never surrendered hers. Not when Derek Ashton filed a false complaint against her. Not when the position she had worked for was taken. Not when she was cleaning marble floors in the early hours of the morning with $4 in her wallet and a bruise on her wrist she covered with an elastic band. Not when her sister betrayed her. Not when the full shape of how alone she had been became briefly, terribly clear. Every day she chose. She chose to keep going. She chose to keep building. She chose to walk into that hotel ballroom in her 4-year-old black dress with a sealed envelope and a 42-page counterfile she had built herself. She chose. Roman Voss was a man who had built walls out of his grief and called them a code, which was a reasonable thing to do with grief when you had the kind of grief he had. And the code was a good one, and it kept people safe. But walls keep things out, and they keep things in. And what they kept inside Roman was the specific warmth of being fully seen, which he had not allowed himself in 11 years, which is a long time to go without being seen. She saw him. He saw her. That is finally the whole story. A woman nobody looked at walked into a building full of people who had everything, and she was already carrying the only thing that mattered. The thing that cannot be taken. She never let anyone have it. And the man who thought he had nothing left to lose found out. In the kitchen of a 32nd floor he had owned for 9 years, arguing about a philosopher they both loved in the early hours of a Chicago morning, that he had been wrong. He had one more thing to lose. He did not lose it. He chose. This is what the Stoics knew, and what Nadia Cole proved in the lobby of the Drake Hotel on a Thursday night in February, in her 4-year-old black dress, handing an envelope to the man who had spent 14 months trying to erase her. The most dangerous thing you will ever do is refuse to disappear when someone has decided you should. The most powerful thing you will ever do is keep building when no one is watching. And the most surprising thing, the thing neither of them planned for, neither of them saw coming, neither of them could have predicted, is that the right person in the right moment will look up from their own book and notice. If this story stayed with you after it was over, if you found yourself thinking about Nadia, about Roman, about what it means to keep choosing when choosing is exhausting, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one, and I love knowing how far these stories travel. And if you want more stories like this one, about women who do not stop, and the moments that change everything, subscribe and stay. I will see you in the next one.